Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or whatever time zone it is, wherever you in the world. It is your Lore Saviour, and today we are talking about dice. Dice and their systems, systems and their mechanics, and mechanics and their dice, which is a very interesting threesome in TTRPGs. I'd actually say they make up the entirety of TTRPGs, but I'm no expert in the field. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, allow me to provide you some context, my dear listener. You may be aware that early this year I purchased the official Modifius Fallout TTRPG, which uses its 2D20 system. And I also purchased the special dice that go with that, which involves the aforementioned enlarged D20, a bunch of special D6s, and a very interesting D20 that has some like body parts on it, so when you roll to hit damage, it lands on one of those places. And I'm also aware that there was another TTRPG that was meant to serve as the official Fallout TTRPG. Prior to this, I've been getting into Fallout a bit more thanks to the TV show on Amazon. And so I've been doing a bit of research because I just enjoy researching and learning stuff. Call it a quirk of my autism if you wish, but I just think it's interesting to learn and educate oneself about this, that and the other and all else in between. Now, this TTRPG is called Exodus, and you can purchase it on DriveThruRPG, along with its two other source books, or three, I don't exactly remember. Actually, all of them are print on demand, except for one specific source book, which is actually its GM's guide, the Overseer's guide, as it were. Now, Exodus had to strip all of its likeliness to Fallout because of like legal things. It's very well documented. I'm not going to talk about that here today. But when I found it was available print on demand, I was really excited because I was actually wanting to do a load of videos talking about this and seeing how, you know, it would compare with the Fallout TTRPG, like running a similar scenario and see which one would garner a Fallout feel. Until I saw that with the Exodus TTRPG, it uses the OGL license, which it means that it uses an older version of Dungeons & Dragons, 3.5 specifically, and with that, all of my enthusiasm just tanked, because I then suddenly felt that it wasn't going to provide anything interesting mechanically, because it was all going to be based around D&D, rightly or wrongly. And that's what this video is going to be talking about. Not so much to do with that, but a little vent about reusing systems and spreading them like your mother. Now, obviously a company that allows others to use their systems and mechanics and whatever else said license to allow to create themes and variations of their own systems and create new worlds with that is bloody awesome. Like, I'm not going to deny that. It has allowed a lot of people who otherwise didn't think it would be possible to be any level of creative to create their own worlds and systems and things, and some really cool things have come out of said ideas, which I'll touch upon in a moment. But it does lead to, in my opinion, two inherent problems. The first of which is something like the OGL scandal may occur again, and a company may decide, okay, we're going to be changing this license now, so fuck you, we're not going to be able to use this anymore, or you have to use a specific version of this where it's not really going to benefit you, and it's going to stifle a lot of independent creators. Big, small, and somewhere in between, although I would argue whether there's such a thing as a big independent creator. You know, there's exceptions to the rules, but that's a conversation for a different time. And people will clap back, and it may do serious harm to the company who is, you know, allowing people to share their license. And depending on who and what it is, that may be deserved. Sometimes it might be a misunderstanding, but regardless, it can create a lot of issues with people who previously loved your system and your license, but now can't, which is pretty shitty. But a positive with all of this is the fact that if you're using a system that people are familiar with, it kind of makes it easier to teach new players if the vast majority of TTRPG players are aware and familiar with D&D, because I don't really know how the editions change from one to the other. I believe it was the third edition that sort of changed the importance of the D20, but again, I have no idea, so don't quote me on that. Let me know in the comments below if you wish to educate me. But regardless, people are aware with the D&D module, so they're trying to do something new. Oh, this uses D&D. Okay, I can slip into this quite comfortably. It's just now the world and the setting I need to get familiar with, which is one less layer of stress and intimidation required, really. Because it can be rather overwhelming when you give somebody a new book and they have to learn all these new rules, all this new lore. You know, I'd argue you don't need to know all the lore, but I've talked about that many times before. But regardless, just seeing, you know, a big book, regardless of its form, physical or digital, can be very intimidating. And if you present something to a player and that you say, oh, it uses this particular system, great, I know how that works. I just need to have an understanding about how character creation works and some things to do with the lore, the setting. That is, of course, if the games master allows you to do that, because they may siphon bits off you as part of organic play, which is absolutely fine, providing everybody's all hunky-dory with it. However, this also can create the issue where it does stifle creativity because you lean too much into a particular system, or it feels like the system that it's borrowing with a different coat of paint. And with D&D, this is quite common. I've complained quite a few times before, both in video form and on social media, most recent of which being this fucking Exodus game, where once again, a very unique setting and idea, well, Exodus isn't that unique given its source material, as it were, leans into the D&D model like it doesn't do anything new mechanically, or very little of it is new, because a lot of it is based on a system that, well, as the recording of this, is 50 years old at this point. Then again, what new and interesting things could be done with dice? You know, have we all seen and heard it before? But I'll tell you now, whatever they could have put out would have been a lot more engaging than what D&D fucking did. There is also much to be said about creativity and limitations, because if you're working with the D&D license / system, like, you know how the balancing works, you know how the roles work, you know how all these bits and pieces work, and in order to bend and break the rules, you've got to understand how all that works. So you can create some really interesting ideas from already existing systems. Like, to take it away from D&D for a moment, I love the Powered by the Apocalypse system. One of the reasons for that is because it gives most of the dice rolls to the players. Like, the games master basically just describes what happens and then the players respond. Like, you may do like a dice roll here and there, you know, as a storyteller, like a random table if you're stuck for inspiration, but I absolutely love the idea, and I love the different ideas and systems that the Powered by the Apocalypse system uses. Like, I've talked about how much I love Ironsworn before, and I love the original Apocalypse world. I know Thirsty Sword Lesbians is very popular, and Monster of the Week is very cool as well. So there are, you know, you can start to bend and break the rules, but only once you understand what those rules are, and sometimes people may not to do that. But however, I do feel there is a huge level of exasperation, just to go back to my previous thing, that you see a really cool IP, but then you see that it uses D&D. Like, I remember feeling a huge amount of frustration when I saw there was a Doctor Who RPG. I love Doctor Who. Like, I mean, I say that, but I started to tail off my interest when Matt Smith took over, and I don't even remember what Peter Capaldi was like, and I stopped watching it after that. So basically, anything from David Tennant and before. But so I was rather excited about that, you know, to put Friends Are Not through Doctor Who inspired adventures. But then seeing it was D&D, like, for fuck's sake, you could have done something really cool and interesting there, rather than something that's very well established and something that everybody knows. Similarly, Dark Souls. Remember there was a Dark Souls TTRPG that did really fucking badly, because the team, well, it was fucking really obvious how they were using D&D, because they had like fucking D&D terms like paladin and whatnot left in there from their sloppy edits, if there were any at all. Which again is super frustrating. Dark Souls, you could have made that really, like, Dark Souls is brutal but it's fair, and you could have made a dice system that reflected that. But nope, just D&D all the way. So whilst it can encourage creativity when you have like an established system to work with, and then you can bend a rule here and there, I do feel that a lot of the time it comes down to laziness, because it's D&D and people like D&D, so that will sell the book off the shelves or the digital storefronts. If it wasn't apparent, this is all coming from a fairly negative bias and my utter detestment for D&D. I've tried it a couple of times and it's not really my cup of tea. I was even convinced to buy that fucking big old 5th edition bundle and the big old hard slipcase thing. That's how keen somebody made me at one point. But then reading it through and trying it, it's like, oh, it doesn't, no. Which is fine, you know, it doesn't have to be everybody's cup of tea, and, you know, the whole thing with the OGO scandal and everything else that's come out after that, it's kind of made me dislike the game and the company a bit more. And the thing that really bothers me really is that so many people think that D&D is the only form of TTRPG out there. And this might be a little controversial. I think some of you watching this think that Vampire the Masquerade is the only TTRPG that's out there. Now obviously, if it doesn't apply to you, that doesn't apply to you. That's great, because I know that you know the other World of Darkness properties. You know, you just have a look at some of my views and we can see what you all think about the other TTRPGs that I talk about. But regardless of that, it's super frustrating that this reliance that we have on one mod or the other, you know, for D&D. There's so many cool things that we can do. At this point, I feel it stifles creativity a lot more than it encourages it. And there's so many cool things we could do, like there are other dice and peripherals that we could use as well. Like, just to give a few shout outs to some indie TTRPGs that I like. There are 2 solo journaling ones called To Be Like a Crow and To Be Like a Cat, which surprisingly allows you to roleplay a cat and a crow as you do certain things. And that game uses cards, and I feel its system would work very well in a horror game. But if you want to know more about that, you can go and do some research. I've already talked about the Powered by the Apocalypse games, but I failed to mention, because I forgot about it, Blades in the Dark was originally a Powered by the Apocalypse games. And then it did some really interesting things of its system, and now it became its own license. And I have one of those games that uses its license, the Cyber Plus Punk TTRPG, which is by far the most gorgeously designed TTRPG I've ever seen in terms of its packaging and its art style. And if you want me to, you know, show you what that looks like, let me know below, because I'd really adore to show that off. Like Modifius, like, kind of clever design in a game system that uses 2d20, like d20s exclusively, and then d6s to use damage. It's kind of like old school D&D, but it puts the emphasis really on the d20 to do stuff, and then d6s to do damage. It's super simple. So when you're trying to teach people how to use their games, players are already familiar with the d20, so that's kind of clever. And there's obviously the Storyteller system, which uses d10s, and I kind of wish that the other World of Darkness properties did use other dice types more, just to make their properties stand out a bit more. But it is what it is. I've also talked about liking Merkborg before. Morkborg, which is an OSR kind of title, and I really like that. I like Shadow the Demon Lord, which is all, you know, D&D based anyway. But there's so many cool things that those games do that makes them different, both in its tone and its setting, that I don't think it would be fair to call those D&D clones. I also backed a game earlier this year that's simply called Slasher, which uses the whole Morkborg engine, because they're very freeing about people using whatever they want from that, you know, providing they put like a little PNG or whatever on their book somewhere, and, you know, a bit of text in the credits somewhere saying what it is. You also have Call of Cthulhu, of course, which uses a D100 primarily to decide things, and I've seen so many different homebrews and modules and whatnot, where basically a lot of people just go to that if you want to run a horror game, regardless to how much connected it is to the Lovecraftian mythos, you know, and all that stuff. The Cyberpunk games just uses a D10 to decide things, and a D6 for damage, and occasionally a D10 if you've got some big guns. Yeah, there's so many different ideas and things that we can be using here, but a lot of the time people just rely on D&D, which is just really sad. And like, again, also trying to make their IPs and systems work with D&D, and it's just sad, I feel. And as I said, whilst it can be good to create things, and there's some really cool things you can do with it, such as Morkborg and Shadow the Demon Lord, as I mentioned, who was designed by somebody who wrote on D&D 5th edition, I feel that as the human race we can do a lot better. And, you know, and flex our creative muscles more. But what do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below if you agree, disagree with me, or you're somewhere in the middle. And also, perhaps share some TTRPGs that you've played that use some interesting mechanics, whether they use coins, cards, dice, or a mixture of all of that, or sign language, you know, because there's a few by Hatchling Games that uses sign language, which I think is very, very cool. So yeah, let me know about all your TTRPG stuff in the comments below. And yeah, whilst you're down there, don't forget to like, share and subscribe this video, and check out all the fun goodies in the description below. And I'll see you on the next upload, whatever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.